Right, okay. Hopefully you are with me. I just had a minor connection hitch at that point, just as I went live. Typical, really. Good morning and welcome to Elevenses. I'm not sure why we're showing survival skills e-learning there, but you are watching Elevenses here with Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and I'll be taking you through the next 20-25 minutes or so with some topical news, controversial views, and some better biking tips. So stay tuned. And what have we got for you today? Well, we'll talk about a mountaintop blaze that's destroyed over 200 exhibits at a motorcycle museum in Austria. We'll be looking at the coroner's calls for a review into the smart motorway system. Ducati have just delivered their 350,000th monster, and ACC injury prevention leader Dave Keilty says the biggest flaw in new motorcycle riders in New Zealand is overconfidence. And that'll lead neatly into an item that I was going to cover anyway about understanding junction collisions, something I was talking about on my Facebook page yesterday. So settle yourself down and enjoy the rest of the show. Don't forget, if you can't catch it live, it will be here on catch up for you, but you can always grab the old shows over on YouTube at my channel Survival Skills UK, or you can get them on my coffee page as well. More details on that later. All right, okay, so just we've got Cheryl saying good morning, who will catch up later, and Clive, who is also saying good morning. Good morning to both of you. All right, okay, so on with the first story of the day. A mountaintop motorcycle museum in Austria has been destroyed. It was called the Top Mountain Crosspoint Museum, and it was near the top of the Timmelsjoch Pass in Austria. And reportedly around 230 historic motorcycles, as well as other exhibits, including classic cars, have unfortunately been wrecked in the blaze there. The museum itself was constructed in 2016 by twin brothers Alban and Attila Scheiber to house their collection of classic motorcycles. The display included brands such as Bruff, Flying Merkel, Indian, Zundap, and Harley Davidson, and motorcycles from more than 100 manufacturers were represented. There was also a smaller vintage car collection, including Ferraris and Porsches. The brothers themselves operate hotels, ski schools, and the mountain lift system in the area, and apparently own the Timmelsjoch High Alpine Road. The building itself was the highest motorcycle museum in the world, and that's what it looked like inside. It had an on-site bistro, and it was becoming a very popular destination because it's on a road that links Italy and Austria. The building itself, as you can see, is reported to have been an Alpine-style wood structure. The fire alarm at the museum is said to have gone off at about 4:40 a.m. and it was quickly tended by local firefighters. But unfortunately, by the time they arrived on the scene, the building was already engulfed in flames. The full extent of the damage is yet to be assessed, but it's thought that at least 200 of the bikes have been destroyed, which is very sad. Okay, so on another note entirely, the UK smart motorway system is under fire again, as a coroner has called for a review into the scheme after an inquest into the deaths of two drivers on the M1 near Sheffield in June 2019. Alexandru Maganu and Jason Mercer were both killed in the crash on the M1 in South Yorkshire. The fatal crash happened after a collision between a Ford Focus driven by Mr. Mercer and a Ford Transit driven by Mr. Maganu. They stopped and got out to exchange details, but were both hit by a lorry who was driven by a bit difficult to pronounce this, Przemysław Służba. I probably mangled that completely. They were both killed at the scene, unfortunately. Sergeant Mark Brady, who oversees major collision investigations for South Yorkshire Police, accepted that the primary cause of the crash was Suba's inattention to the road. But he also told the hearing, had there been a hard shoulder, had Jason and Alexandru pulled onto the hard shoulder, my opinion is that Mr. Zuba would have driven clean past them. Zuba admitted 2 counts of causing death by driving without due care and attention and was jailed for 10 months. But Mr. Mercer's wife, Claire, said after the court case that the wrong person was jailed. She said the events would not have taken place if there'd been a hard shoulder. And referring to a review of smart motorways that's currently ongoing, she said an agenda genuinely concerned with avoiding future deaths is not served by a pretend review. That wouldn't have saved any of the 40 plus people killed by smart motorways or by jailing the wrong person. My hope in this devastation is that no more lives are ruined needlessly. Subsequent to the inquest, coroner David Urpeth has added his own concerns. On the stretch of the M1 where the accident actually took place near Sheffield, the hard shoulder has been replaced by an active lane. And he said that smart motorways without a hard shoulder carry an ongoing risk of future deaths. And he added that he'd be writing to Highways England and the Transport Secretary asking for a review of smart motorways after this inquest, where he found, or basically it was heard, that the deaths could have been avoided. Highways England has so far only responded by saying that it's addressing many of the points raised. My own opinion on smart motorways, having had a car written off on a dual carriageway when I couldn't get fully off the road, I just had time to park the car, get out the front, out the door of the car, and I was walking around the front of the vehicle to open the boot and get a warning triangle out when the car was hit from behind. My opinion is that the system as it stands at the moment is totally inadequate. These motorways were supposed to be put in place with automatic stop vehicle detection system. According to the latest information I can find from Transport England or Highways England or whatever they're called now, only something like 14 miles of the 150 odd miles actually have automatic vehicle detection systems to detect stop vehicles. And the average time it takes for the control room to spot a stop vehicle via their closed circuit TV cameras is 14 minutes. 14 minutes. It's just a wonder there haven't been more crashes. Moving on from that mini rant, you'll recall if you watched the previous Elevenses webcast, I mentioned Ducati, who have released sales figures showing a drop of almost 10% over the pre-COVID year of 2019. I mentioned that Ducati probably suffered worse than some other brands because they've not been well placed to take advantage of the boom in smaller and less expensive bikes, which has been driven by sort of COVID fears of using public transport. And I made the point that Ducati had relaunched their fortunes in 1990 with the highly affordable parts bin special Monster range. But I also noted that in recent years, the company has shifted its focus more and more away from these affordable motorcycles. Well, entirely by coincidence, it turns out that Ducati have just delivered their 350,000th Monster. And to make the point that I was making about the sort of affordability issue, the bike concerned is a Monster 1200S black on black, and that retails alongside of £15,000. The Ducati press release is full of positive spin about the Monster and talks about how it's the biggest selling Ducati model of all time, how it's the longest serving motorcycle in the range, as well as a rather dubious claim to have created a new segment of the motorcycle market, the sports naked. Well, I think any motorcycle built prior to about 1970 that came without a fairing would be considered a sports naked. Triumph's Bonneville, for example, would have been a classic example of the machine, and so would the Norton Commando. So I think it's stretching a point to say that it's a new motorcycle segment. But what is important, I think, to remember is that the design exercise essentially arose from creating a new bike from existing parts to give the machine or give the factory a new model at the minimum of cost to the factory itself. And it was that inexpensive nature of the bike, both to put on the road and to sell, that rescued Ducati from a financial crisis. Now, given that the budget cost of that original bike and the premium price of this 350,000 monster are poles apart, it's hard to see how the current machine really relates all that closely to what Ducati say was the legendary Monster 600, which opened the Ducati world to many young motorcyclists. Well, relatively few young motorcyclists are going to be able to afford a £15,000 machine. All right, okay, so just to remind you, you are watching Survival Skills here, Kevin Williams and the Elevenses webcast. Don't forget, you can catch up with me every Wednesday and Sunday at 11. You can head over to my YouTube channel there, Survival Skills. Don't forget, they're all important UK, or you'll get someone showing you how to light a fire with sticks or something similar. Right, okay, so next item on the list. Well, you may remember that in 2018 and 2019, I was lucky enough to be able to make a trip to New Zealand. And whilst I was over there, what I was doing was working on behalf of the New Zealand Transport Agency and the Accident Compensation Corporation on the nationwide Shiny Side Up motorcycle safety initiative. You may recall also that I rated the scheme very highly and wished that we could have something along the same lines here, because basically this safety program is being led by motorcyclists for motorcyclists rather than being delivered top down in the way that we're only too familiar with in the UK when people tell us how we should be keeping ourselves safe. Now, the ACC are responsible for covering accident claims in New Zealand, including motorcycling claims. And in 2019, they paid out $103 million for 4,360 motorcycle injury claims. Now, the concern is that New Zealand right now is going through a boom in bike sales. Don't forget, it's actually heading into autumn out there. Well, it's still late summer, really, isn't it? And they've got a boom in bike sales and in bike use because Kiwis who would normally head abroad for a holiday are staying home, and many of those are switching to two wheels to do some exploring. And the ACC revealed last month that almost 9,000 motorcycles and mopeds were sold in 2020, and that's the highest number in a decade, and up by around 500 on last year. Now, that may not sound a lot by UK standards, but remember, the entire population of New Zealand is actually under 5 million. Now, I also happened to spot, whilst I was running through my news items, that ACC injury prevention leader Dave Keilty was talking on the AM show on television earlier today. I worked with Dave on the Shiny Side Up tours in 2018 and 2019, so I know him very well. And something he said in the interview on that show absolutely resonated with me. He said that the biggest mistake for new riders is overconfidence. Now, that's certainly true. We tend to get people given a minimum of skill and then tell them they're ready for the road. We do that with CBT over here, and I've always said that CBT is inadequate for road use. But unfortunately, riders who've taken CBT think that's it, they're done, and all they need to do now is stick on their oil plates and off they go. There is a wealth of training after CBT to be done here in the UK. And Dave pointed that out. That's just as true in New Zealand. And he urged new riders to get as much assistance and training as possible. And he also pointed out, of course, that riding requires some self-discipline. And what he said was it takes a little bit of self-control, a little bit of practice, a little bit of getting some coaching and guidance, and taking the time to look after each other. I think he's probably referring to group riding activities there. But what he said that really got sort of to me was that a lot of the accidents we're seeing, they're absolutely preventable. Now, this is the crossover point to the better biking tip, because this refers back to what I was talking about on my Facebook page yesterday. If you head back to my Tips on Tuesday posts, both yesterday and the previous week, you'll see that I actually addressed exactly this point. 2 weeks ago, I listed the most common types of motorcycle accident. They happen at intersections, they happen on corners, and they happen when overtaking. And although there's this belief in New Zealand that the landscape, as they say, is very different from other places, the first thing I noticed when I was researching the issues before I headed off for the 2018 Shiny Side Up series was to look at New Zealand crash stats. And what I found, of course, was that really not all that dissimilar to what happens here in the UK, even though in theory the roads in the New Zealand and the UK are rather different. And I also happen to know that our UK figures are not too different to what happens in the USA, which again has a different kind of riding environment. So the implication is that what's happening is human error rather than environmental issues. Now, the news report this morning showed that the NZTA, their data shows that there have been no less than 2,758 crashes involving motorcycles at urban intersections in the last 4 years. And again, this reflects precisely what happens in the UK and in the US. We have lots of crashes happening to riders at junctions, particularly in built-up areas. And as I say, it just happens to be coincidence that this was very much what I was looking at yesterday in Tips on Tuesday. And what I wrote yesterday was I've just got hold of the latest edition of the DVSA's Essential Skills book, which I just happen to have to hand. I remember to put my prop out. There it is. I've always said that the DVSA's Essential Skills book is actually well worth reading. People tend to ignore it because it's for learners. It's not. It's for all motorcyclists, and it does cover some very, very good ground. And in fact, before you get onto roadcraft, you really should be reading Essential Skills. However, it doesn't mean that it's bulletproof. For example, what it says in the relevant section about junctions is that they are a point where two or more roads meet. Junctions are hazards where there's a significant risk of an incident occurring. Treat them with care no matter how easy they look. That's a pretty good summing up of the problem, but riders are continually caught out at intersections. Why? Well, there's one reason. The section that is on junctions in this book is around about page 180 somewhere. Yeah, so there we go. Yeah, I'll just show you that. What it basically tells you at some considerable length is the right way to ride through a junction using the DVSA's OSM PSL system, which is, give or take, a slightly modified version of the police system from roadcraft. Everything in those 17 pages is how to do it right. There's remarkably little about what might go wrong. And so yesterday, what I was trying to provoke in my article on Facebook, which got 0 responses instantly, although quite a few people read it, nobody replied to it, was I was trying to provoke some thinking about rider and driver error at these junctions. Most people are aware of the classic sorry mate, I didn't see you Smidsy collision at a junction where the driver emerges from the motorcyclist's near side. In UK and in New Zealand, this is by far and away the most common junction collision, but it's not the only one. One to really watch out for, and I have to admit I wasn't fully aware of this until I did a bike safe course back in the very early 2000s. One to watch out for is the oncoming vehicle that turns across your path from the opposite direction. It's a much, much rarer crash, but when it happens, it's a much more serious impact. Drivers don't get this one wrong so frequently, basically because the oncoming bike is often easier to see. It's in the middle of your windscreen rather than you having to look left or right to spot the bike. But when it does happen, it tends to come out of nowhere from the rider's perspective. Riders really aren't expecting that. They don't get the brakes on and the impact is bigger. So it kills many more riders in built-up areas. But there are other ways that drivers crash at junctions, or riders, I should say, crash at junctions. And when I deliver my crash course briefing, on the ride skills days at Brands Hatch. This is something that I do try to get riders to think about. So one of the things I show them is this particular photo. Sorry, it's a little bit smaller than I was expecting it to be. It should have been bigger than that. I must have picked up the thumbnail by mistake. But I think you can see what I'm talking about here. If you look here, you can see the junction warning sign, and if you look down the road, you can actually see the finger post that tells you where the junction is. So you have the distance between spotting this warning sign and actually arriving at the junction to plan what's going to happen next. All right, let's have a quick look at the junction itself. There it is from a close-up view. Now you can just you can see what the problem is on this one. The entrance on the near side is completely blind. You cannot see into it, and any driver coming out of that junction can't see out of it either. So there's a significant risk of a vehicle approaching that junction not being seen. And if you look closely at the photo, you can also see that there's actually a skid mark on the surface right under the camera lens. Now, of course, that's the Smidsy collision with the driver pulling out from the near side, but it's not the only possibility. I've already told you about the oncoming vehicle that could turn across your path, and you'll notice there's a bit of a bend on the far side of the junction as well. So it's possible that a driver might not see a motorcycle until quite late, simply because the junction's in the middle of a corner. But again, those aren't the only possibilities. What else could happen? There are a number of different possibilities. Basically, anybody can go any way from any approach. So from that near side junction, for example, a vehicle could turn out across our path and come down by our right shoulder. That's the one we mostly expect. But they could pull out and go straight over. The one that most people forget is that they could also pull out and turn into our path and go in the same direction, in which case we might have to brake very hard if they don't see us. What else might happen? Well, oncoming vehicles might turn across our path. They might go straight on. They might turn left into the side road on the near side. And people tend to think that's perfectly safe. What can possibly go wrong if that vehicle turns left? Well, what if it swings out because it's a long vehicle and needs to make the turn easier? Articulated lorry turning into a narrow lane will probably swing wide across onto the wrong side of the center line to make that turn. But riders often forget that is a possibility. Of course, we also have that entrance on the offside. And what might happen? Well, drivers might pull out into our path. They might go straight across. They might turn right and force us to brake and slow down. Or, of course, they might turn left, in which case, again, we tend to expect nothing to go wrong. But once more, if there's an awkward junction, awkward vehicle to get out of that junction, somebody might swing into our lane before they can safely complete the turn. And here's the one that everybody always forgets. What's in front of us? Where is that vehicle going to go? We always tend to assume that it will go straight on. But does a indicator always come on before a vehicle slows? Not usually. In many cases, instead of mirror signal maneuver, what most people tend to do is maneuver and then signal and then check the mirror to see what was happening before they put the indicator on. So the danger is that we will in fact find a vehicle in front of us braking to turn left or right, and even coming to a complete standstill. If there's someone coming around that corner, vehicle turning right may have to stop. Even if the vehicle's turning left into a narrow lane, if there's something coming out of it, they may have to stop in that case too. So there are lots of options of things that can go on and go wrong at junctions like this. One of the scary things that I found when I was researching junction collisions on rural roads like this is the number of motorcyclists who actually run into the back of a slowing vehicle because they aren't thinking in terms of the vehicle slowing and possibly stopping to make a turn in front of them. And of course, junctions like this are a classic place for overtakes to go wrong too. The problem is, though, as I said, we have a matter of a few seconds from the time we see that crossroad sign to the moment the situation actually starts to develop for real in front of us. If we haven't actually thought through all those options that can happen at a junction and sooner or later will, then we are not just approaching what is actually a physically blind junction because of that restricted view on the near side, we're also approaching it mentally blind, and because we're simply not aware of what could go wrong before it actually happens. So basically, no wonder so many riders get caught up in what should be easy to avoid junction collisions. Right, okay, so that's enough on that today. That brings me to the end of today's show. Next time out, I'll be looking at some new battery technology which could resolve the range anxiety thing by giving us the options to top up a battery in just 5 minutes from a electric pump, as it were. Don't forget, I'll be back on Sunday then. Just to mention for the newsletter, which is now going out on Fridays, the idea, as I said the other day, is to work around the Facebook problem where a limited number of people see my posts. So if you want to subscribe to that newsletter, it'll give you the link directly to the Facebook post involved. What have we got in the way of comments since I mentioned last? We've got Nick has given us a morning sign. Nigel's appeared as well. Clive Teague says that the new monster comes in at just over 10k. Yeah, that's the smaller monster, not the 1200. Completely agree that CP2 is just the start and more training is essential, says Kevin. David says so many people now parking right up at junctions, making it hard to see. It's certainly true. That's one of the problems of built up areas, basically, is that people have to park. Certainly there's not much off-road parking here. And Patty says, thanks, I'm a newbie and need more work on junctions, more overcautious than anything, but good to be reminded. Don't think you're being overcautious, Patty. Just think you're being cautious. As I say, so many junction collisions happen that we do really need to be on the ball on those. Right, okay, so thank you very much indeed. Don't forget, we'll be back at 11 o'clock on Sunday. Thanks for tuning in, and stay safe out there. Bye for now.